welcome and thank you for coming to our South African Vaishnavi Heart to Heart Sangha. Today we're welcoming Loka Devi Dasi, and Loka is a real good friend of mine. I've known her for many, many years. She is high-powered. We're going to tell you about her high-poweredness. So Loka, she's a disciple of Bhakti Maharaj, our revered Gurudev. And she was drawn to Krishna consciousness through Bhakti Maharaj's powerful teachings, she said, of leadership. There was a time when Bhakti Maharaj was focused on leadership. And so she came right during that time like a magnet. She was just pulled right in. And so Loka is trained as a lawyer. She served as an attorney with many senior executives at the highest level of the US federal government. We need to say that a little quiet. So she's been in both the executive and the legislative branch. She's personally taught leadership and developed definitely different aspects of leadership. Personal development is an area where Loka's been focused, consistently focused. She's an example of that, and she teaches that, and she does that at the federal executive level, as well as wherever she's asked to do it. Here she is with us. She's been on this spiritual journey for some time. She says that her growth created an interest in encouraging others. By her spiritually developing, that made her wanted to share. And that's, of course, that's bhakti, right? Train one, share, train one, you share it. So, and she's especially attracted to wanting to serve women, especially in her own process. Okay, so this is our this is our coach language here. In our own process of presence, purpose, and aliveness. So presence is she's there, present with everyone, listening, not thinking about anything with herself. And she's on purpose, and everybody knows that. And she's alive means that she is aware of the material and the spiritual, very much aware. And she brings that in her training as a coach. So she's international coach. She's trained. She's certified by the International Coach Federation, accredited. She holds coaching certification from Coaching Training Institute and Struzzi Institute. I don't know the Struzzi Institute. Loka, you need to tell me more about that. She currently serves as an executive and development coach to executives from US and international government agencies, offering coaching to devotees and mentor devotees who are part of ISKCON's Krishna House in Gainesville. She is part of ISKCON Resolve and provides mediation services and she serves on the boards of IFAST and Harinam Press, and also at the Krishna House. And this is really important. She has two raddies, as you call them, raddies. I just had this other coach tell me she just got a new little puppy that's going to do the same thing. Gorgeous little puppy. Anyway, they're called Cassie and Smidge. And they hear the holy name every day. And they're registered pet therapy team. So that's something that's going on in America a lot. I'm guessing it's going on in other places where, people that are very conscious and they have dogs that are trained, in her case, puppies, to help people. So when appropriate as part of her coaching, she introduces the mutually beneficial human-animal bond to improve her clients' presence and well-being. That's something that's happening a lot in America right now. And Loka is a part of our IFAST community in Washington. As you know, this program is being put on by our international IFAST and WuSA and national IFAST. She's a part of that community, and she resides in Gainesville, Florida. So I'm very happy to welcome Loka. We've had the opportunity to work together in a foreign country. She is delightful to work with, as well as she's such a beautiful, wonderful friend to everyone. So Loka, thank you. Thank you so very much. Welcome.
Thank you. You left out the most important thing. You're just my sister. You're my God sister. So,
yes.
So nice to see everyone today. It's really a pleasure to be here. FIRNZAJJ asked me to do something, and I came up with this topic of belonging. It was feeling very relevant and sort of where my brain was going a lot. And as I prepared my thinking and got myself organized and took a look at my notes, it sort of took off, and I realized belonging is like this big root ball of a tree that has lots of little branches that stem off. And you get into a lot of different subject areas you can from that whole inquiry about belonging. So I won't be able to touch on everything. You may say, oh, what about this? And it's fodder for another conversation. And I think that I want to present this really just as a discussion, because the more I delved into it, the more I realized I don't know anything about belonging, but it really is an issue, I think, that faces all of us, and it is very much on my mind, and I see it on the minds of a lot of the young students here in the Gainesville area, and I hear a lot of it from clients, both in the secular world and in the devotional world. And so I think it was worth exploring. So here's our little conversation on that. Before we get started, I'm going to say just a quick prayer to my spiritual master to guide me and help me say what needs to be said and maybe not make too many gaffes. So please just a moment while I say those prayers. Nama Om Vishnupradaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Tirtha Swaminiti Namine Namaste Krishna Pradaya Prabhupada Shritatmane Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Bhakti Tirtha Namine Nama Om Vishnupradaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskacharya Shatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasai Gaura Bhaktivinda. And so those prayers, the prayers are actually one of the things that I do that's part of the community that I belong to. And so it's a good way to start off with belonging. So I entitled this, this session, Our Yearning to Belong, excuse me, because I think it really is a yearning. It's something very deep and fundamental in all of us to find a place, to find our place, to find our connections, to find the people that we want to be with, the community we want to be part of. And I started thinking about that. And on the material side, we're going to talk about that. There are a lot of reasons why that happens to us, but I think it really stems, the more I thought about it, from our spiritual nature. So as you all know, we're all spirit souls. We're spirit souls in bodies, different bodies. We all together today happen to be in women's bodies. We're in women's bodies. We're located in different areas of the world, and we've got, we may be of different races, but we're all in women's bodies. And of course, there are entities in men's bodies. And then there are entities like my puppies who are in dog bodies, and trees and plants and lizards and the fish and the birds and all of these entities that are in bodies. And all of those entities have separated from the Lord, from the Supreme Lord. We're all called, in our scriptures and our teachings, we're all part and parcel of the Lord. And we have, through our desires to try other things out, to sort of do our own thing, we have been separated out from the Lord. We are part and parcel, but we have separated out, and we have been placed in this environment, this material environment, where all of the things that we say we want are potentially available to us, but then we get to go and try to figure out how to get them. And we spend a lot of lives trying to figure out how to get those things and make ourselves happy. And yet that sense of yearning for belonging and being somewhere that makes sense to us, I think stems from that very initial separation away from our home, away from God, who is the person that we really want to be connected to. And so that's, and we also talk about in our practices about the Lord in the heart. So the Lord is merciful enough that he accompanies us in all of these different incarnations and all of our paths by remaining in the heart of the living entity. So he's always there, ready to exchange, ready to communicate if we pay attention to it, if we know that he's there. And so in a very deep, deep way, our hearts understand that yearning to belong is a very natural kind of state. And that's what we're looking for. Now, The idea of belonging also really then shows up in our physical environment, but it's described in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it can get us into a lot of trouble. So one of the things, Vrajalila asked about Strozzi Institute. Strozzi teaches coaching, but it's a form of somatic coaching. Somatic coaching says that we don't just know things in our heads, we know things through our bodies, through our sensations. And in fact, neuroscience tells us that the knowledge that we think we have in our brains actually comes from two other parts of our bodies as well, our hearts and our guts. And the neuroscience shows that there's actually through the vagus nerve that goes from the brain and moves through the body around the heart and down to the gut. There's actually more input from the gut and the heart to the brain than there is from the brain to the gut and the heart. So, the bodies play a real strong role. They're the vehicle that we maneuver with, and they tell us a lot about this world that we live in. And one of the things that they tell us about is that we have core nutrients of safety and security, connection, and dignity and respect. Those are by core nutrients, I mean, those are things that everybody wants, everybody longs for, and that are really part of who we are in our most healthy and wholesome state. And so, actually, if you think about Maslow created a hierarchy, and he talked about belonging and love, and they're stepping stones to self-actualization. So that sense of needing to belong and needing to feel that connection with others, that ability to love, is actually a threshold requirement to self-actualize. It's almost impossible to become self-actualized if you don't have that sense of belonging and caring. And neurologically, that feeling of belonging actually starts with how we process belonging in the world. So maybe the way to put it is it begins with a sensation in our bodies. We have a sensation, and that sensation is transmuted into an emotion, a feeling, and our brain gives that emotion a name. And the name might be a good name, it might be a bad name, it might feel positive, it might feel negative. But those sensations are what begin to drive our understanding of what it means to belong in the world. And those sensations begin from the very minute we come out of the womb. I mean, they're early sensations, and constantly, even without the ability to provide language or to talk about it, as we do as we get older, those sensations and the entity's response to those sensations is creating an entire reality of what does it feel like to be and to belong. So it has everything to do with how we were brought up, what we're taught about relationships in our families, our core families, and we begin to process a lot of these things. We start to have a response as early as the age of 2 and 3 and 4. We have an understanding of what makes sense. Our teachers, maybe our local churches, our communities, our neighborhoods, and then the broader global environment, the energy of the environment that feeds into all of these different neighborhoods. So, if you're brought up in a family where, when I was little, there was a saying, very old saying, but I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, that children were meant to be seen and not heard. So this is a very early message. So if it took a lot to get over it, you'll see I'm quite gabby and I'm heard all the time. But early on, the message was, don't say anything. If there's a conversation going on, you don't have the right to say anything. Your input isn't welcome. It's not needed. It's not relevant. What the adults are having a conversation here. And so that message begins to convey, begin to imbibe that message as a child. And the next thing you know, you're in school and the teacher says, does anyone have anything to say? And that child says, well, I don't have anything to say because I'm supposed to be seen and not heard. If you come out of an abusive environment, if the parents are not so good at engaging with each other, if they don't provide a good model, the child learns skills that are survival skills in that setting. How am I going to keep myself safe? Well, maybe I'm going to keep myself safe by hiding. Maybe I'm going to keep myself safe by running away. Maybe I'm going to keep myself safe by just staying in the corner and pretending I don't see it. And so all of these elements create neural pathways in us that predict, the patterns are created that predict how we will start to respond as we continue to grow and mature. And a lot of these patterns are settled as early as the age of 2 or 3 or 4 and 5. And we carry that through, and all of a sudden you see a 15-year-old behaving in ways that don't make sense, or a 20-year-old behaving in ways that don't make sense, or a 40-year-old behaving in ways that harken back to what that person learned when they were little. And so a lot of times when we find ourselves in community or in relationships where things aren't working and we want to just get away, we're both reflecting our own pattern of what we think is safe and what we think is appropriate in those connections. And the hard thing is to remember to step back and understand that the other person or the other people in the community are also expressing what they believe is appropriate, what they learned as children. And what's kind of interesting about that is that there's something called attachment theory. I'm not going to go into details on attachment theory, not that I'm all that qualified to do it anyway, but basically it has a lot to do with how a child brought into the world begins to attach to its mother or to its parents. And that expression of love allows the child to either feel safe and secure and attached to the parent, or dysfunctional expressions of love or family teach the child to withdraw and stay separated from the parent. And that plays out into adult life. Based on the studies done in attachment theory, 50% of the population, 50% is unattached in the way that they were brought up. That means that 1 out of 2 people that you come across or that you may be engaging with are very likely to be someone who doesn't have the best skills in connecting, who's afraid of connecting, who's afraid of relationships, who doesn't quite know how to handle things, and who's doing the best they can to cope in the real world. And that's a kind of a scary statistic when you think about it. And when we think, and especially when we think Sangha is about association, when we think about ourselves coming together, when we think about the beauty of spiritual life and the ways that we want to come together to support each other in spiritual life and in our growth and development, the idea that 1 out of 2 people that you come in contact with may actually be having a hard time with that very thing that we're all seeking puts an entirely different framework on all this stuff. So that's kind of how these neural patterns get established and how we begin to process belonging in this material world on this platform in our daily lives. Now, the good news is our brains are really adept at recognizing patterns, and they're also adept at changing. So we can learn skills. We can have tools that allow us to step back and say, oh, I'm going to do something differently. I don't have to do it that way. And I can recognize that my safety and my dignity and my sense of connection can express in other ways. I don't have to be afraid of those things. I can learn how to do something differently. But now, when we look at belonging and we see around us, and I'm sure you've all had these experiences, and I can think of lots of experiences where we're told, yeah, but in order to belong, you have to look this way, or you have to be this or be that. And so a lot of times what we've learned when we were young teaches us to start maneuvering and presenting ourselves to all of those influences out there, whether it's from family, from friends, from schoolmates, from work colleagues, from the world at large, teaches us to say, how am I going to look? How am I going to be accepted? What can I do to look appealing and acceptable to all of these people? And so we tell ourselves, and we get these messages all the time. I mean, all you have to do is look, in the United States anyway, look at a billboard, look at a magazine, watch a television show, listen to a radio show, pick up a book, and you're going to hear, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not thin enough, you're not rich enough, you're not lovable enough, you're not powerful enough, you're not successful enough, you don't try hard enough, you're not safe enough. You can just fill in the blank. There's this not enough mentality that's actually a sort of a scarcity mentality, and not enough that we can't do it. And if you're not enough, it's really hard to belong. So then there's that push of, I want to belong. We struggle hard. we push hard to get people to accept us the way we are. And we find ourselves repeating those same judgments about everyone else. They're not successful enough. They're not smart enough. They're not thin enough. They're not pretty enough. They're not the kind of person I want to hang out with. They're not enough. And next thing you know, you have little cliques and little groups, and no one's happy because everyone in those groups is still looking for that real connection, the one that we started off talking about that we left behind, that connection with God. And since we're all parts and parcel of God, then really, we all really want to connect with each other on that level, but we're all covered over and discussing on this very superficial level about, well, why don't you look this way? Or why don't you treat me this way? This is the way I want to be treated. This is the way I expect to be treated. And that makes it quite challenging sometimes. So it plays out even worse. I mean, and I'll just, throw this out there because I know we see it all over the world, and we've recently seen, we've seen real turmoil in South Africa, and I know I've lived through turmoil in a lot of the parts of Africa that I've worked in and lived in, and you see it here in the United States. You've seen it most recently on our political platform here in the United States, that sense of turmoil. So now we just don't know how to treat each other properly, and so. If you're scared, you may find yourself staying in an abusive relationship. If you are concerned that you won't make it or that you're not good enough, you may stay in a job that isn't satisfying or where your boss treats you badly and you just keep putting up with it because you think, what else can I expect? We find ourselves in mentorship relationships, or in the worst case, you might even find yourself in a relationship with a teacher that isn't positive, isn't supportive, but you're accepting it because down deep somewhere you believe that this is all I can expect. This is what I was brought up to expect. It's a continuation of a pattern that I'm used to, and it's okay. It's as best as I'm going to get. And when we say that to ourselves, that kind of self-talk, we're basically saying, I don't deserve any better. I'm just garbage anyway, so I don't deserve any better. And that's not true. That's not true. We all deserve the best, and we all want that longing to be part of something. But the trick is not to achieve that or the illusion of that by putting other people down and by putting ourselves down in the process and accepting what we can from others when it's just a little bit of this and that, a drib and a drab. So belonging, I sort of broke this down, but there are two sides too. As I was exploring this idea of belonging, I realized I think about belonging in a lot of ways as, where will I go? Who's going to accept me? How will I go into a community, or how will I go into a group, and how can I belong there? And I realized that there are two sides to belonging. Part of the other side of belonging is, what sense of community and belonging am I creating in the way that I work with others for other people who also want to belong? So there's this reciprocal nature to belonging, in which not only do I approach and want to be received and accepted in a community, but then the question is, how am I in that community creating and fostering an environment which will be equally accepting and nurturing for others who want to belong? And sometimes it's really hard to get to that second piece when we're all feeling caught up in, but I don't feel good about things, or I don't feel like I'm safe here. I don't feel like I belong here. And so it's a bit of a dilemma. And there are, I think, several tools, things we can talk about a little bit, but it comes down to an acceptance that we are not victims, that we're accountable to ourselves as well as to others. And in our teachings, in the Vedic teachings, Srila Prabhupada said loudly he didn't want blind followers. And what did that mean? Well, he didn't want blind followers. He wanted people who would ask questions, not in an aggressive, defensive, or combative frame of mind, in a humble state of mind. But, I really want to know. I want to know. And so it's appropriate to ask questions. We don't want to be blind followers in our lives any more than we want to be blind followers in our spiritual path. So all of those pieces come together into how it affects our desire to belong. So belonging, after talking about belonging in sort of a grand way, I broke it down into 3 categories. So in terms of what we get to choose in terms of what we're going to do. So the first is, the 3 are acceptance, inclusion, and identity. And I think identity is really critical, but we'll go through them one at a time. So acceptance, we want to be seen and accepted for who we are. We don't have always a strong sense of ourselves. We don't always, our sense of self often has been formed by what other people tell us they see or who they think we are. We say, okay, that must be who I am. Or we find that we have to fit ourselves into a niche that's available. And so we twist ourselves around and try to make ourselves fit into that niche instead of being who we are. And the result of all that is that we start putting on performances. We aren't really showing up as who we really are. We're putting on a performance and the way that we think everybody wants us to be. And when we do that, it's really hard to feel that we've been accepted, because underneath there's this part of us that's saying, but that's not who I am. That's not who I am. We want to be, we want to uncover our true identity, and we want to be seen as who we really are. In inclusion, in spiritual life, we call that association. So what we're doing now, the Sangha, this concept of a Sangha, where we're all coming together and we're included, no matter who you are, no matter what you think, no matter what you say, you're part of this group, you're accepted in this group, you're included in this group. And we want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We want to feel supported by like-minded people. And the institutions that we're part of, even though that's what we want and that's what we're aiming for, the institutions that we're part of don't always live up to that, because the institutions are made up of people. And as we pointed out a little earlier, people are not always able to live up to those ideals themselves because they're struggling with their own stuff. And so when a very fundamental fear for most of us is that we're going to get kicked out of the tribe. We're going to get kicked out of the tribe. I want to be part of this society. I want to be part of this group, but I'm going to be kicked out if I don't conform, if I don't do what everybody wants me to do.
I looked at this thing and I was like, is that her mom?
Hare Krishna?
It's okay. Leela, can you mute
right.
Odwa? Can you? Okay, she's muted.
No, if there are questions, I don't. Yeah, okay. So we have this concern again about being kicked out of the tribe or out of our community or out of our family. And so again, we begin to put on acts. We pretend that we're one way instead of somewhere else. And every time we do that, we're really doing violence to ourselves. We're letting go of our essential nature. We're not allowing ourselves to flourish, allowing ourselves to show up as who we really are. And when we do get part of the community, there's always this feeling at the back of our minds that I'm a pretender. I don't really belong here. This isn't really my community, and they're going to find me out and they're going to boot me out. And so if they're going to find me out, I have to actually pretend even harder. And I have to do more and more what they expect. And so we want to be sure in groups like this that we're actually, again, inquiring, this flip side of belonging, and asking, well, what is it that I'm looking for? Who are the people that I want to spend time with? Is this really going to nurture me? And again, that search to see what's going to nurture you and who you are does involve sometimes looking at some scary pieces of our pasts or scary patterns that we have that are very hard to let go of, and sometimes that we're not even conscious from. And that brings us to this third piece that I mentioned of identity. Identity is basically seeing yourself first and having the courage to show up and be seen. And I want to read you a really kind of a great quote about that. It's actually from Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was a president of the United States. And he gave a speech called the Citizenship in a Republic. And it was delivered at the Sorbonne in Paris in April of 1910. It's been around a long time, this quote, but it's kind of an amazing quote that goes to this notion of having the courage to show up and be seen. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. The beautiful thing about this quote, which actually made the speech famous, is that it's really a calling forth for all of us. You know, it's so easy to point fingers, and it's so easy to criticize ourselves. And I'm going to guess that if anybody on this call is at all like me, you all have that little gremlin sitting in your ear, and mine's on my left shoulder, poised right there in my ear, telling me all the things that I don't know how to do, that I don't do well, that I can't ever get right, about all the shortcomings I have, all the things that I'm not. You know, that little negative voice. And for me, a lot of that negative voice begins with my dad. But, you know, it was built on by lots of people over the years. And, you know, you have to begin to be aware of that little voice that's telling me, you're not this, you're not that, you're not the other. Because when I listen to that little voice, it's a lot easier for me to turn to someone else in the room and say, oh, look at the things you're not. So I will pass judgment. I will push blame. I will do all those things. And really what this quote is saying is the credit belongs to the person who's not afraid to show up and fail, not afraid to show up and try and make the effort. That there is no effort without error and shortcoming, that will happen when we make the effort, but that the effort in and of itself is the reward. Because if you fail, at least you failed while daring greatly. And underneath that quote, underneath that calling forth, if you will, is an appreciation that everyone counts. Everyone counts. No matter who you are, no matter what you do, no matter what body you're in, no matter where you live, no matter what your state of development, no matter where you are, everyone counts. We are all on this path together. And very specifically with regard to this Sangha, of course, on the spiritual path, but everybody out there is on that spiritual path. Everyone, some of them don't know what they're looking for yet. They know they're looking, but they don't know what it is. But it's not up to me to look down on. I sometimes see when I look at the critters out, you know, I live in Gainesville, Florida, and there are deer that roam the property, and periodically there'll be a snake in the yard, which I'm not really fond of. And the lizards scatter around. And of course I've got the dogs and this, that, and the other. And it's sometimes very easy to get into a state of, well, you know, or a frog, you know, a frog jumps in the pool, or I suddenly see a little caterpillar has slipped into the pool. And it's really easy to think, oh, it's just a caterpillar. It's just a caterpillar. It's just a mosquito. It's just a bug. You know, what do I care? And I try to remember the entity inside that little body is the same as me. And that little entity deserves whatever dignity I can afford that entity. The more I can afford other entities the same dignity and care and compassion that I want for myself, the more I'm contributing to a world that will make improvement. And that little entity is on its path. You know, whatever's going to happen, it's not up to me to decide how that moves forward. But I try to remember that everybody counts. What to speak of all of us in human bodies? You know, whatever your background, whatever your upbringing, whatever situation you're living in, whatever level of education you have, whatever job you have, you know, here in the United States, sometimes it's very easy. In fact, it's become quite a national pastime to look down on people who only have a certain level of education, or who only have certain kinds of jobs, or who only live in certain areas, or who are a certain skin color. It's become sadly quite a national pastime for us. And it's not appropriate, because everyone's identical in the Lord's eyes. Some of us are just more covered than others. Some are further along on the path than others. But this idea that I count as we begin to really imbibe that notion that I count, it's a lot easier to begin to open up our minds and our understanding to the idea that everyone counts. And it's hard, I believe, as I reflected on this topic of belonging, it's really hard to feel that you belong with a group or with anybody when it's all about me. I'm at the center. I'm doing everything I can to struggle and play the game out there. And I try to cut other people off. If I'm really going to want to belong, it involves having to expand my understanding of everything that everyone is going through. And it might not be the same as my pain, might not be the same as someone else's pain, but the pain, the events that created the pain may be different, but that basic pain or suffering or longing or desire is very fundamentally the same, very fundamentally the same. So we see it. Some of you are just beginning to get introduced to the Vedic scriptures, but we even see it in the most fundamental of teachings for the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, which is spoken by Krishna to Arjuna on the battlefield. And Arjuna is lamenting the same things. What am I going to do? These are my family members. These are the people I grew up with. I love these people. I can't do this. What will it be worth winning the battle if everyone that I know is ultimately destroyed? I can't do that. I can't, it's wrong. And so he's feeling this pain, this agony in this human body, this human experience of how can I respond so negatively to the people around me, the people that I love. And Krishna provides instruction through those 700 verses. He explains why ultimately we each have to show up and be who we are, do what we're meant to do on this planet, in these forms. And that the outcome isn't necessarily going to depend on what we do, let me rephrase that. We aren't going to be in control of the outcome, but we are still asked to make the effort, this idea again of daring greatly, make the effort to show up and be part of the circumstances that will lead to an outcome. And this is a really critical part of the teaching. So we even see it in our scriptures. And ultimately, of course, Arjuna does decide to fight, but he does so after inquiring, after exploring, and in the final analysis, what Krishna says is that you have to make the choice. I've given you all this wonderful knowledge, and now it's up to you to make the choice about what you want to do. Do you want to keep seeing yourself in the terms of what we're describing here as someone who isn't important enough, or will you go out and stand up? And so in that concept of standing up, it creates these questions of taking some responsibility for ourselves and using our intelligence. So questions that I a lot of times have to ask myself, and I work with clients, we ask this: who am I? Who am I? What do I stand for? What am I committed to? How do I want to show up? These are all fundamental questions that go to that sense of identity. And we might understand that we are basic spirit souls, that we're not this body, but then what does that mean? What does it mean in terms of how I will show up? Do I show up and pontificate to everyone that, I'm not the body and you're not the body, therefore just, get with the program? Or do I begin to explore how to be more loving and more compassionate and more understanding to the challenges that someone else may be going through, to experience for themselves what it means to be part and parcel of the Lord and on the spiritual path, not being the body? What am I committed to? Sometimes you hear that question asked in the format of, what am I willing to die for? It's a big question. And sometimes it's hard to get to that depth, to say, yeah, I'm willing to die for that. And yet we've seen from some of the great acharyas that in fact, they are absolutely willing to lay their lives on the line, their health on the line, for what they believe in intensely. And these are the people that we want to follow. These are the people that we have great respect for. I think about Nelson Mandela, and of course, and I won't pretend to have, tons of experience with how he ultimately led the country, what he did. I just know that in the period when he was elected, after he was elected, I was in South Africa working with the US government, and it was an amazing time to watch. And Nelson Mandela himself was amazing to watch, because someone who had every right to be angry, to be vindictive, to sort of say all of these injustices were done to those of my race, and boy, are we going to make you guys pay now. And it in fact, when he first began as a revolutionary, that was a lot of his mood. A lot of his mood. He looked for ways to negotiate where he could, but he was really on a mission. What I stand for is I'm going to make things right. And yet, where he became such a beloved leader, at least in the international arena, and I believe also in South Africa, where he really stood out above and beyond the crowd, where people wanted to hear from him and really listened to him and understood him, was as he transcended those emotions, those initial patterns of an eye for an eye, you do this to me, I'm going to do that for you, or you've destroyed my community and I'm going to go out and we're going to do everything we can to get our own back. As he got past those kinds of concerns, and he simply spoke about the possibilities and love. And he used Marianne Williamson's quote about, being that shining light, being that child of God to whom so much was possible, whose light should shine, that you were not born to keep your light in the dark, to keep your light under a bushel. You were born, in fact, to shine. You were born to shine. And so belonging, we think of belonging in some ways as subsuming ourselves into a whole. That's not true. Even in Krishna consciousness, it's not about subsuming ourselves into a whole. When we think in Krishna consciousness, if we talk about the idea of becoming one with God, and sometimes the Buddhists talk about becoming one with God, or some of the New Agers will talk about being one with the universe, that's the lowest form of realization. Because yes, you're there, but you're denying the self, the individuality that makes you who you are, the personality that who you are. What Krishna wants to see from us, what God wants to see from us, and I think this is true in every great religion, it may not be taught fully in every great religion, but what's there in every great religion is this idea that, yes, we want to belong. And in belonging, each person shines, each person stands out and presents the gift that is unique to that entity, unique to that Jiva. And that is just a really amazing way of thinking about belonging. It's not about burying yourself or hiding who you are, but it's about, as this quote from Brene Brown is, in Brene Brown's book, From Teddy Roosevelt, is it's about the one who dares greatly in the arena, no matter what, who shows up, who says, I do stand for something, and I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep trying. And, as we try and as we learn what we're standing for, sometimes those things evolve. And so there are layers that get peeled away, and we realize, oh, I thought I stood for this, and I actually stand for something that's an even deeper appreciation of that concept. But the idea is to not give up on ourselves, and appreciating that by belonging, we also don't give up our power. It's not about giving your power away, because in its best form, belonging is empowering. It is empowering. And we want to create the ability to connect. There are my guru Bhakti Tirtha Swami, who wrote, he's been gone for some years now, for I guess almost he's going on 17 years. We're moving into the 17th year of his departure. And he wrote so many books and had so great an understanding of what was needed at that time and what's needed even more strongly now. And some of these ideas of belonging are included in concepts that he put forth about building a community. And so in that concept of community building, it helps us see that we aren't actually in a passive state when we belong. And looking to belong isn't a passive state, that there's actually activity that goes on both sides. It's, as I said earlier, a reciprocal kind of exchange. And he boiled down, there's so much of a treasure in all of his books, but he boiled his concepts of community building down into 4 principles. And these are the 4 principles. Treat everyone you encounter as if the success of your spiritual life depends upon the quality of your interactions with them. 2, reflect upon the person you love the most and aspire to treat everyone with that same quality of love. 3, view all conflicts as your own fault first. And 4, realize that people in your present environment might very well be the people with whom you will live out your life and who will be with you at the time of death. Some of these are kind of intense, especially if you're new to these ideas. But what's really, I think, interesting about those principles, treating everyone you encounter as if the success of your spiritual life depends upon the quality of your interaction, and reflecting upon the person you love the most and treating everyone that way. Those are about digging deep below our patterns, below the things that we may have been taught, that we probably were taught in our growing up, and finding that wellspring of compassion and caring and love and acceptance, and offering that to everyone that we meet. And that's a tall order. It's not easy, because even if we want to do that, then the conditioning or the little voice in the ear will come back and say, what are you doing this for? Nobody's treating you that way. And I think the beauty of these principles for me is that it reminds me that even if others are not able to fully reciprocate and give me that, when I am able to work myself through issues and keep providing that and try to deepen that and offer that, Krishna arranges in the most amazing ways for me to get that back, one way or the other. It may be that the community I'm looking for isn't the community I think I'm part of, but it crops up in a different way. It may be, as we've discovered through COVID, that the community is a virtual community. We're bound together and very connected through technology, but it's just as strong a connection. Hearing your voices, seeing your faces, it can be just a strong connection as it would be if we're in the same room. Don't get me wrong. I love giving people hugs. I love getting hugs. All that's good. Love, honoring together. There's something special about being in the same space with people, but the connection can be there regardless. And we just learn to deepen and deepen and deepen that wellspring of connection that is in all of us, regardless of what we're getting back. And so that shows me that it's not just, I don't go somewhere and expect to be included in the community. This looks good to me. This is the neighborhood I want to live in, or this is the church I want to belong to, or these are the people I want to hang out with. But what am I offering to that community to make them want to include me, and that will add to the community and help create the container that I want and that I think they're looking for as well. Viewing all conflicts as your own fault first. Again, not in a judgmental way, not in a beating up on yourself kind of a way, but it's really easy when I find myself in an argument with someone to say, well, look what he did, or look what she did, or it's all them. And this is an opportunity to reflect, to stop a minute, reflect back and say, so what is it that I might be able to do differently? What am I adding to the mix here that I might not even be aware of, but that is eliciting this response from this person? And maybe at the final analysis, all I can do is step back and say, I can appreciate that they must be in awful pain to do this. When I look at the way things are being handled, again, in the United States at our legislative and political levels, and I see the absolute cross communications. I mean, it's just insane what people are saying and the things that they say that they believe. I really, it was very disturbing at first, especially since I came out of that environment, say, really, what is wrong with these people? And this is not an environment that I was working in. And what's wrong with these folks? It's awful. But as it continues, I observe that and I realize what kind of pain they have to be in. Pain as they're trying to live up to some crazy notion of what it means to be in power, of what it means to make sure that their families are cared for, of what some ideal is as to the way that everyone is supposed to live. And it's so turned inwards that they're unable to see the impact it's having on everyone else. But if I can appreciate that they're in pain, I may not want to be into the dialogue, or I may not be able to do anything about the dialogue, but it really helps me soften my judgments on them. And it helps me understand that when I find myself in a conflict with someone, I can try to step back and hold the space for that person to feel more accepted and more loved, because that's when things begin to shift. And then realizing that the people in your present environment might be the people with whom you will live out your life. Again, are these people that I want to be with? Do they support me? Do they care for me? Am I able to show myself fully, mistakes and all, warts and all, problems and all? Am I gonna, I love my sister Vajalila, and she will point out to me things that I don't do well. Sometimes it's not easy to hear, but I know she loves me. I know she cares about me and that she cares about my well-being, and she has for over 20 years. So even though my initial response might be, this is painful to hear and I don't want to, who are you? And I don't want to go there. When I stop and take a breath and I think about it and I say, okay, what's here for me to know? What do I need to know here? And I understand this person really loves me and she has my best interests in mind. Then, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I can show up with those mistakes. I'm grateful that I have someone who's willing to see me for those mistakes and at the same time, call me forth to be better than my mistakes, better than the things I don't do well yet. Encourage me to grow. It's again, that concept of calling forth. So those are Bhakti Tirtha Swami's principles of community development and community building. And I think that for me, they really help me understand that I'm responsible for creating an environment that we all make the effort. It's not just passive, that each of us individually and collectively, we belong and create the environment to which we want to belong. And I find that very, very empowering. So there, I have one last thing I want to read to you all. I think I said this would be sort of a meander into the concept of belonging and what does it mean? And what are my reflections on it? And you've gotten a little of that, and I hope we'll have a lot of conversation about it. The question always comes up, of course, so how do I do that? Practically, how do I do it? What are the things I can do? And somatically, what I find helpful always when I'm triggered, when a pattern is cropping up, begin to pay attention to how do I behave in a certain setting? What do I notice? How does this pattern keep showing up? Is this the way I always talk to somebody who pushes my buttons? And then say, does that pattern serve me anymore? Maybe it was helpful when I was an 8-year-old child and I was afraid that I would get hit or disciplined, but it's not so helpful as an adult, 60 some years later. And in order to get to that space of being self-aware, we need, I found, to stop rushing headlong into the next thing. Do. It's always do this, do that, do the other. And a real critical part of spiritual path is belonging, and is being. And of course, a root word of belonging is be. So who am I? Who can I be? And in order to do that, it's important to stop and pause. And the best way to do that, that's easy in any setting, there are tons of exercises for this kind of thing, but to do that in any setting, in any moment when we're triggered or feeling anxious, is literally to stop and breathe. Often when we're breathing very shallowly. We breathe, maybe down to the sternum area, just right about here, to the heart. But a real breath would go all the way down. You feel your diaphragm expand. You take a deep cleansing breath and you exhale it. So inhaling on a count of 4, deeply, and feeling the air come in and nourish your entire body, and then exhaling on the count of 4. And as you do that, you'll notice the count of 4 slowing down, and you'll notice that your breaths get deeper and your exhales are more full. And as that all happens and you feel things slow down, you will feel more settled in your body and more able to actually face whatever the challenge is that's in front of you. And then when you are in that space of, okay, so let me inquire, let me ask, what's happening here? What's happening here? And it might be not just what's happening with me. It might be if I'm in a situation where I feel challenged by or threatened by someone else, if I have a mentor who's not working for me, or I have a teacher who's not working for me, or I find myself in a community where they are saying things or doing things that I don't appreciate or understand. The questions, they're questions to ask yourself and assess do these people serve my best interests? Are they helping me? Are they helping me get where I want to go? Or are they holding me back? Are they willing, like my God sister Vrajalila, do I know that they care about me enough to help propel me forward? Or are they really just trying to put me in my place, quote unquote? And so there are a series of questions that Debbie Ford was kind of an amazing coach and teacher. She left her body back in, I think, I want to say 2011 or 12 of cancer, but she wrote an amazing book called The Right Questions. And these are the 10 right questions that I find are very helpful to reflect on both my own growth and the interactions that I may be having and the company that I keep, the people that I want to be around. Will this choice propel me toward an inspiring future, or will it keep me stuck in the past? Will this choice bring me long-term fulfillment, or will it bring me short-term gratification? Am I standing in my power, or am I trying to please another? Am I looking for what's right, or am I looking for what's wrong? Will this choice add to my life force, or will it rob me of my energy? Will I use this situation as a catalyst to grow and evolve, or will I use it to beat myself up? Does this choice empower me, or does it disempower me? Is this an act of self-love, or is it an act of self-sabotage? Is this an act of faith, or is it an act of fear? Am I choosing from my divinity, or am I choosing from my humanity? And those are the 10 questions. And, it may appear on a surface review that those questions are very much focused on me, on what am I thinking? What am I doing? What am I able to do? And yes, and at the same time, as you explore those questions, or you explore Bhakti Tirtha Swami's principles of community building, which tie right into several of those questions, it's really about the larger whole. It's how do I not, by empowering myself and being that light, how do I help others move forward and empower themselves? And when we do that and empower each other, we empower ourselves as a community. And there's so much that's possible and so much that's wonderful. So I'm going to leave it there and open up for questions. I hope that's appropriate timing. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, my dear friend, my dear sister, Loka. So Leela now will, she will let whoever would like to ask a question. Leela is going to do her thing.
Good.
With everyone. So just, you can unmute. Leela's very aware of what's going on with you if you want to ask a question. So Leela, you want to, I think Bhavita has her hand raised.
I see Bhavita. Yes, go ahead, Bhavita. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, FIRNZAJJ, for such an amazing talk. It triggered a lot for myself, especially with the whole idea of belonging. So I will just quickly give a backstory. so you understand my question. So I struggle with the idea of belonging. So I'm half Indian and half Black. And it's been a struggle for me to find where I belong. I'm not Black enough. I'm not Indian enough. And well, let's just say, in terms of the Indian side, I've struggled to get acceptance, whether it's from family or whether it's just from people in the general community. And I found myself having to, as you said, put up an act to overcompensate and show that I do have the side of me, right? And even with rejection after rejection, I've still wanted to try harder. And I guess the question is why? Even when because the natural thing is when you are rejected, you need to, take a step back, especially if you're being shown that this specific space does not want you. So the first part of the question is, why do I keep wanting to push myself in a space that doesn't want me, that keeps showing me that, you're not Indian enough, right? And even if I take it to a spiritual level, we are taught that we're not this body, but unfortunately certain things do infiltrate themselves within, the Krishna, with the ISKCON community, right? So there's that. And then you asked you spoke about how we can focus on this idea of belonging, what we can do, we can take a step back and we can pause. But I try small things. So a small example, I always had my hair straight because I felt like that makes me look very Indian, right? And then I told myself, you know what, just have your natural hair, have your curls out. It's a big step. It looks superficial, but it's a big step to you to say, you know what, I'm taking control of myself and a part of me. But I find myself going back into my hole after a while because that confidence is not there. So how do I navigate really like owning the fact that, I don't know, I don't fit in, and is belonging for everyone? And if it's not for everyone, what happens to those who don't fit into a specific space? Yeah, thank you.
I love easy questions. Thank you. It's everyone does belong. Everyone wants to belong, and everyone needs to belong. So, and it's a struggle for all of us. So the first part of your question was, why do you keep trying? Because that desire to belong is so strong, and you've sort of identified. I don't. Can I read between the lines that this is about the temple community? Is it the temple community or just anywhere?
Anywhere, including the temple community.
Yeah. So you're surrounded in an environment where you're struggling with that sense of body appearance and being in the body. And there are people who are judging, well, you're not this and you're not that, so therefore you're not enough. And that's their issue. It may feel like it's landing on you, but it's still their issue. And so, but we keep trying because it's a natural instinct to want to be part of something. We want to be included. And again, as I say, that we're seeking, ultimately what we're seeking is to recapture that sense of connection to the Lord. And then depending on what you were taught too as a child, it may be that there's that idea of don't give up, you've got a right to be there, keep pushing forward. There are lots of other elements that go into making up our neurological background that will push us to behave in certain ways. And, so that just in a generic kind of a way. So it's actually not surprising that you would push back. And actually, I think it's quite natural to push back. You said you thought it would be more natural to step away, and not necessarily if you think, no, but this is where I belong. This is where I want to find a place. I guess the question is, though, is everyone like that? Sometimes there are subgroups within the larger group. There'll be a group of people who are supportive and who are caring, because over time, if we're constantly trying to push ourselves into settings where we don't belong, then it's very unhappy. We become unhappy, and we aren't going to grow. And if that's all that's available to us, it's hard to think of finding community in other ways. So as you were speaking, I was thinking a little bit about Yamuna Devi, the Prabhupada disciple, the amazing Prabhupada disciple, who is also such an amazing cook, who is so famous, in her path, and how close she was to Srila Prabhupada, and how engaged she was with Srila Prabhupada, and how as the movement took off, and certainly once Srila Prabhupada had left, and some of the men made it to India and decided that women should not be treated as equally as men, did not have the same roles and position as men. She found herself, this person who had been a right arm for Srila Prabhupada, who'd been involved in everything, who'd been treated so caringly by Srila Prabhupada, found herself very pushed to the side and very much not appreciated by her own god brothers, by people that she'd known, pushed away. And in her case, it became a catalyst to get more focused on her relationship with her spiritual master and on the scriptures, to appreciate that at the end of the day, we take shelter of his lordship, of their lordships, of Radha Krishna. Now that's cold comfort, because on a daily basis, we want to be part of the people around us, we want to be part of the people around us. But I share it because sometimes, depending on what's going on for any one of us on an individual path, Krishna's arranged a situation for us to realize that we don't want to put all our eggs in the basket of one group of people, but that we really do want to begin to turn our attention to something higher and more transcendental and more important. And, there's also, I guess one of the questions I'd have for you is, do you accept? Do you feel like you belong to yourself with that mix of Indian and Black, Indian and African American? Because a lot of times, the more we are able to see ourselves in a confident and positive way, the more we accept who we are, the more compelling that is for others to accept us. It's when we are playing the game and we're buying into the definitions and the identities that people want to force upon us, that we feel that it doesn't work. I have curly hair too, as you probably noticed, and it has been the bane of my life, my entire life. I grew up in the Midwest where everybody was blonde and straight haired, and I have spent my entire life trying to get it to go straight, wearing it long, pulling it back, so I could try to look like everybody else. You know what? I don't. I just don't look like everybody else. And once I started to accept that and to sort of let it do its own thing a little bit, try to manage it somewhat, but and I began to accept that this is how I look. Well, it's kind of amazing. It stopped being a concern for me. And all of a sudden I didn't notice that it was a concern for anybody else either. Instead of being unhappy and miserable and feeling like no matter how I try, I just don't look like them or act like them. I'm just, by being myself, giving myself permission to be myself, played an enormous part in others offering their permission to accept me as I am. And it's important. Permission is a strong word, because you don't really need permission from anyone else. You need to give yourself permission and play with it. And there's not in 5 minutes, that's about the best I can do, Prabhu. But there's a lot going on there. But primarily the thing is, don't let yourself feel less than because someone else out there says you aren't pure this, you aren't pure that. Ultimately, give yourself permission to say, I know who I am. I know what I'm able to provide, and I'm going to do it. And when you decide like that and you pray to Krishna to help, he will send the people to help you do what you need to do, and he will allow you, and you'll find your place.
Thank you so much.
Krishna.
Thank you, Loka. We have Bongile has a question. Please
Yes.
go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Very much. Hare Krishna, thank you so much for taking the time to be here to speak to us. So I'm actually quite curious as to, I guess the sense of belonging, like you're saying, goes hand in hand in accepting ourselves, and also, I guess, being rooted in ourselves and what that means. And I guess our truest self, for the most part. I'm just curious now, that journey towards, you know, being rooted in one's truest self and kind of undoing the layers of, I don't know, illusion and what other people, like the layers that we absorb, that become us based on our past experiences and things like that. So how can one go about rooting themselves in this truest form when one is, okay, so in terms of myself, right, I have realized, not recently, but I guess I'm accepting it now, that I'm quite an excitable person. So what does that mean? It means that I'm easily impressionable and easily, like, you can easily get a reaction out of me, I guess, reactive. So for me, the way I understand that is that one is, it's almost like when you're in the air, when you're not grounded, you sway easily, you know, you're easily blown away, you easily go to the left, easily go to the right for reasons that may not necessarily be your own wanting to go left or right. You're just blown by the wind, and that's where you find yourself, kind of thing. So how do you then have that sense of belonging within yourself and know how to separate what's not real, so to speak, from the truest part of yourself, when by nature, in this body or personality that we have, you're quite excitable. So how do you make sense of that?
Mangale, thank you. It's a nice question because it actually underscores what I was saying early on in the conversation about our patterns and our conditioning. So it can take a lot of practice. It can take a lot of practice, and it can take a long time. But what I can say to you is that you may feel like excitability is your nature, but it's actually a learned response. It's a conditioned response. And so you've taken a huge first step by just understanding that you have the pattern. I mean, that's a pattern. And then the ways, at least in somatics, and again, it can take a long time, because what happens is the body, I started out by saying the body has a lot of wisdom in it. We think it's all in our heads. You can get something and grasp something intellectually, all of us can. But until you actually embody it and live it, it goes right out the window. I mean, I can talk about how all day long about, oh, you know, love my neighbor as my brother. And if every time I walk out the door, I'm busy cursing my neighbor because I don't like the way he parks his car, or I really wish he would clean up his front porch, you know, it's all in my head, this idea of love thy neighbor as your brother. It's because what I'm experiencing, what I'm practicing is, so the idea is, how do I get it into my body? And the exercises, some of the exercises that we use in somatics that start off, they're not even necessarily related to a pattern. They're learning to be more grounded in your body, like the breathing that I mentioned to you. There are other ways. Movement is a really important part of being settled in your body, so that the emotions, when you get the sensations, you don't just run off with them. It's finding a way to get more settled. And breathing can help you settle in a moment, in that space. Meditation is a form of getting settled, you know, mindfulness, meditation, some of the things that people talk about. For us, we chant Hare Krishna. But exercise is also an important part of that. And for some people, it's very active exercise. You know, there are some people like play soccer or run a marathon, or, you know, go swimming crazily or whatever. Others, it's yoga. For some, it can be as simple as walking in nature. Nature is very calming, and the more we can get settled into our physical body, the more we can begin to experience, well, what does it feel like when I'm settled? Not when I'm responsive and reactive and kind of impressionable, but let me get that experience. Let me begin to create that memory of what it is to be settled. And if someone were to ask me in this settled state, you know, whatever a question might be that would trigger you, what is it like to come from this place with an answer, as opposed to running off the cliff if that's the tendency. And as I say, it takes a lot of practice. It isn't something that you're going to do overnight, because the muscle memory, the cellular memory of running off the cliff is so strong. It's something that you've done for a long time. And it's very likely that at some point it worked for you. Maybe it made you feel more included, or maybe it was an easy way to find a way in when you were new in school or new in the office or something. Maybe it worked. The question that I'm hearing from you now is that it doesn't feel like it's working. It doesn't feel like it's as good a solution as it might have been some time ago. So now, what's the solution? How do I get more grounded? How do I begin to connect with that stable, centered part of myself? The part that actually would like to say something to that crazy part and say, no, let's do it this way. And as I said, there are somatic exercises. There probably should be a practical component to some of these things we're talking about, but I mean, there isn't time in this kind of a setting to do that. But that's the best way I can advise you. And I'd say if it's possible, a walk in nature, or whether it's dance or yoga in your room, or swimming in a pool, or going to the gym, some form of movement that allows your body to understand what it's like to move away from those emotions and those sensations and just get grounded. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is. Thank you for that.
It's the best I can offer at this point, but it's not unnatural for you to want to belong and to keep going after things. The point of assessment is at some point as you feel more settled, to ask yourself, so is there really some way that I can be part of this group and show up as myself, or am I looking in the wrong place? And and that can take some time, because you don't want to cut yourself off from contact. But so I say, I'm really grateful for technology these days, because it does allow us to create a whole nother Sangha that might not be available at all. So,
thank you, Loka. We have Itu. Itu, hi. Go ahead.
Hi, Krishna. Hi, Krishna, Mother Loka. Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. I think my question is very specific to ISKCON, and kind of off the back of Bhavita's question. But I wanted to ask within the context of like patriarchy, and just for women in general, feeling like they belong within the ISKCON space. I've spoken to a few like young women, and often when they go through difficult experiences, the tendency is that they don't feel supported, or they don't feel they belong anymore, and they tend to retreat from whatever services that they had. And usually they do that because they can't remain in the space, because the dominant energy is male, and they can't, they don't feel accepted anymore for whatever, reasons. So what happens in a situation like that, where even, for example, when I was reading, there's this recent book, Prabhupada's Daughters. I think that's what the book is all called. I couldn't help but notice like how a lot of women tended to kind of retreat and decide to find a space on their own where they could feel that they belong, but no longer doing active service or within ISKCON generally. They just kind of just found another space where they could feel that they belong. So there's a tendency to kind of push women out because of this feeling of not being accepted or just not belonging and not creating the space for that inclusivity. So yeah, I just wanted to understand, especially when we have to kind of introspect and question whether this is a right fit for us or not a right fit for us. What do you do? Because ultimately it's probably just not going to be a right fit, because, we all just kind of basically leave.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm certainly not encouraging everyone to leave Sanatana Dharma at all. I think I said at one point, the same patterns that we each have individually, the things that have allowed us to cope, in seeking for those essential nutrients of safety and security, of connection, of dignity, we go after them as individuals, sometimes in very perverse and inappropriate ways, depending on how we've been brought up. And that translates into our institutions. And so I'm not saying it's true of everybody in ISKCON or every part of ISKCON, but there are clearly parts of ISKCON where there are interpretations that have gone a little too far, that in some respects, Srila Prabhupada's words about women and about the role of men as teachers to women, guru to women, this sort of thing, or being more focused than women, have gone off in an untoward direction because they're misinterpreted by people who are hearing it from their own conditioned tendencies and their own conditioned background. And so I'm not saying that what they do is right, but it's a reality. And that's hard to change. I mean, that is very hard to change institutionally. It might mean that you find, if you're not already initiated, you're looking for a guru who doesn't treat you like that, who gives a different example. If you are initiated, supposedly your guru's supportive, but you find mentors or you find people who you can bond with together who will help face the discomfort or the sadness of those situations. But ultimately, I think it comes down for all of us, because the institution is going to do what the institution does. And I know there are several of us who are working, trying to hope that we can make changes to the institution, the way some of these things are addressed. But whether that happens or doesn't happen, I think it at some point comes down to that idea of, well, what is it that I want? What am I looking for? I know when I started working as a lawyer, there weren't all that many women attorneys. I wasn't the first tier. I wasn't the first wave of women, the one woman, the solo woman among 200 men at Harvard. But I was definitely in that next class of women where, we might be a quarter, 25% of the entire class. And there were fewer and fewer. It was hard to get to that place of showing up in a meeting where the big guns and the clients didn't turn to you and say, bring me a cup of coffee, and here I am, I'm here as your attorney, or I'm here supporting the partner on this question. And it takes a lot of digging in to say in yourself internally, what is it I want? What is it I'm after here? What do I believe in? What do I stand for? I know when I first met my guru, it was not so clear that what he was offering was part of ISKCON. Sorry. I didn't know about ISKCON. I started hearing things about ISKCON. I don't want to be part of that. And we have become closer and closer and more involved with ISKCON. And what I have realized is forget the things that people say I should be doing for ISKCON. I mean, I serve the best I can. And the more I want to serve, the more I'm allowed the opportunity to serve. But what I realized that was even more important to me than the fact that there might be some men out there who don't appreciate what I do or don't see me so much as a devotee is that my guru does and Krishna does. And I understand that I am here on a spiritual path and I want to learn. I want to become a better devotee. I want to develop that relationship with Krishna. That's what I want. That's what I want. And because that's what I want, those other pieces, they become molehills instead, little anthills instead of big mountains that I have to traverse. They're just sort of part of the terrain, but I'm really clear what's important to me. And I think, I'm not saying that we shouldn't all band together and do our best to try to make changes in the institution in the best ways that we can. And some of that will be done locally and some of that will be done globally. And it might change in our lifetimes and it might not. But ultimately, instead of the tendency, like an enemy gets poked and sort of pulls in and withdraws, which can be the inclination, oh, let me withdraw. The question is, what do I know is important to me? What is it that I want here? And when you get clear and grounded on what it is you want and what you stand for, then those events may occur and they'll become less meaningful and less important. And Krishna will find a way to engage you, because that's what he's looking for. He will be pleased by your desire to serve. And as I say, in the same way that Mother Yamuna did, she ended up creating an environment where people came and saw her, because she was so potent in her service and in her worship. And that's who she was. And she never strayed from the primary. She didn't stray from the primary. She didn't let the events define her. She defined herself. And it may sound like cold comfort, but I think it really is the key ultimately. I saw it with my guru. I see it with so many of the acharyas that are part of our movement today. The ones who stand up, they understand what they're about, and they do. They go forward, and they just in their determination and their grounding, they do what they need to do, and eventually people take notice. But Krishna always takes notice.
Haribol De Loka, this is 2:00, time we usually end. However, I'm going to request, because there's a couple more questions. I saw Hemangi had her hand up, and I believe Leela said there's a question in the chat. If it's okay with everyone that we can go another 10 minutes before we close, I'm just asking your permission. Just want to see if this is okay with all of you. If it is, just do your reaction and put your hand up, please. You could just go to and just put your hand up. Just go to reactions, and you will see where you can put up. Yeah, you can. Great. Okay. So I see most of you saying okay. Wonderful. Okay. So Hemangi, if you can go with your question, and then Leela, you have a question in the chat. Yes.
Yes, okay. and then Noelia after that.
And Noella. Okay, wonderful. And then we'll close after Noella.
All right.
Thank you. Hey, welcome, Deepa. Deepa, thank you so much. Deepa is from England. She's a community there. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to close out and have Hemangi ask her question.
Thank you so much. It's very significant, this class, and very amazing points, especially on belonging, but also we have this framing which you mentioned before, that we have this desirable qualification which we need to achieve in order to belong. Yes, in terms of institution and like that. But now in this period of COVID-19, we have a special issue happening that unfortunately, even a lot of devotees are struggling with a different kind of depressions, burn out, or I don't know. So I seeing in my small local community, and I also see that we as a local community, we are not knowledgeable enough. We don't know how to approach these devotees who are facing this burnout or different kind of depression. And these devotees are also feel that they are not belonging, and they are like this connection are losing. So I'm just thinking what we can do as individuals, and also as a local community and as a global ISKCON community, to help these devotees, some of them to like cure in a curative way, some in a preventive way, to educate ourselves how we can help them to to try to, stand up for themselves, to try to feel that they belong, and how also this stigmatization we also have inside, how to somehow rise above this stigmatization and prejudice there are circling around towards this like kind of devotees who are struggling with this. So we don't have an answer. We are still struggling. We have unfortunately so many devotees now here, and I'm so desperate because I don't know how to do it. I'm just thinking that maybe we as a global community have a lot of resources, and how to use it, what to do to help them belong, to I don't know, educate ourselves to help them, and to help ourselves to prevent in the future to happen to us.
It might be, there's a group that's forming called ISKCON Hearts, which is trying to create resources for communities. And it may well be that that's a better place. I can take that back, and Vraj is part of that group as well. We can take that back to the group and try to make sure that we're working on a website now to get resources available, because obviously you're talking about a much larger issue than a 3-minute answer. But as far just in terms of, so, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot to adjust and address and sort of train. I guess there are 2 thoughts that I'd have. One is, just like Krishna consciousness is a process, coming together as a community and overcoming some of these kinds of issues is also a process. So it doesn't happen, you know, a lot of times, I know I grew up with the idea that you're going to jump in and you're going to get to an X result and that's it. You know, you want to get done. And many people I know are in that task completion mentality. And we overlook the idea that task actually does get completed through process. And sometimes when it's a process like this that has to do with our mental well-being or our overall well-being, the process can be long and painstaking, and it can even be hard, you know, difficult. So it's just a case of, again, you're pointing out to me how important it is that we do come up with resources for communities like yours. For all of us, really, all of us need some kind of help like this, because the idea of depression and being isolated is not exclusive to what's going on where you are. It's across ISKCON. Otherwise, you know, in a simple kind of a way, I always ask myself, well, if I'm feeling alone and sort of depressed, what would I wish someone would do for me? What might help me? You know, what might help me? And sometimes the mere picking up a phone or sending a text or just checking in with someone saying, how are you? How are you? Talk to me, tell me, or you know, if you need someone to listen to you, I'm happy to do that. If you feel comfortable doing that, or if there's someone in your community that does that, or if you can come together with an ISTE or as women together, where there's an opportunity to just share your hearts and let someone express their pain. And sometimes there's no answer to that, but sometimes merely feeling that you have permission to speak it and that it's heard in the larger room and that it isn't judged or criticized is a wonderful first step for someone who otherwise is feeling very lonely and cut off. And so I offer that as one possible way, in a small way, while other resources are trying to pull together and get to you. Is that helpful? I hope.
Yes, actually, that's
or not.
At least something. Yes, but actually, I'm just thinking it will be nice that they are, as you mentioned, it's not only in my local community, but they are everywhere. So if we can somehow do something to connect all these devotees so that they know that they are not alone, that there are also other people who are struggling, yeah. They are also devotees, and maybe they can help each other and someone can be there to guide them or something, that could be also helpful.
That is the point of the ISKCON Hearts Initiative, and it's just a small group that's trying to pull it together, but there's absolutely an understanding and awareness of what you're describing, and a desire to try to pull together resources to assist.
Great.
So before we go on to the other question, I just wanted to thank Heymangi, because she actually did bring this to my attention some weeks ago, about this need in Slovenia. And as Loka is sharing, ISKCON Hearts, this is one of the directive, this is the initiative. And very soon there at least will be some resources that these devotees can possibly connect with. I also want to share that Heymangi, we want to just give her prayers and support. She's doing her PhD and she's almost finished with it. And I believe you did your thesis recently. So we just, as a community of Vaishnavis, we want to thank you for this effort that you're making. And I know how concerned you are about that community in Slovenia. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for the blessings. Thank you.
And thank you for being an example of caring. You know, thank you for asking that question on behalf of those devotees, because in doing that, you're giving an example to all of us of what care and compassion look like. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your expertise, and thank you for sharing with us. I do believe with all this strength, little effort, we could do amazing things together.
Yes.
Haribol. Okay, Leela, I think I see Nomsa's hand, and I don't know about the question you had in the chat.
Okay, so Noelia actually doesn't have a question. So I'll ask this question that was posted in the chat, and then we can finish with Nomsa's question. How can we learn to accept ourselves whilst accepting the shadow side of ourselves and any significant anarthas that we are harboring?
How can we accept ourselves while accepting the shadow? Is that what it says?
Yes, the shadow side of ourselves and any significant anarthas.
So actually, when we accept ourselves, we aren't, the idea isn't to encourage you to accept the shadow or just say it's okay. So this is who I am. So, you know, everybody's just going to have to live with it because that's kind of who I am, you know. The idea is to own, I mean, by that kind of reflection and internal inquiry, to begin to see what is holding you back. My guru used to say, you know, Krishna doesn't just see what you're offering, he's really looking at what you're holding back. And through our anarthas and the shadow, our shadow, if you will, the shadow side of us, that's often the covering or the way in which we are hiding from the things that we're holding back from Krishna, the things that we don't want to surrender, the things that we don't want to give up. And so the purpose of learning to accept ourselves and get grounded is actually an exploration in which we are willing to face the shadow, face the things that aren't working, face our anarthas, and address them. You know, let them go, or as I said, learn to find ways to transform them, to change them, to do things differently so that we can make progress. And the process of accepting self is not to beat up on yourself because you have a shadow side, because we all do. All of us, everybody on this call, everybody in ISKCON, everybody on the planet, hear this, everybody on the planet, we all have a shadow side. The difference is that those who are willing to look at it, to face it, to confront it, to say, I can do better than this. I'm not going to let this define me. That's where the power is. And that's where, you know, you're accepting yourself with the negatives, but the idea of accepting is to say, okay, I see that I have those. It doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me a worthless person. It doesn't mean that I'm a piece of junk. We talk to ourselves sometimes like that. You know, I'm just a piece of garbage. No, I don't count. I'm not important. It doesn't mean any of those things. We're all part and parcel of the Lord, which means we all have the same qualities, not the same quantity, but the same qualities in minute form. So you're not junk. But the idea is I'm accepting that I really am something bigger than this, and I can look at these things that are holding me back and deal with them. So that's what I would say in response to that question. Unless you think there's something else that needs to be embellished on, that's kind of what comes up.
Well, that's beautiful. She actually can't, she can only type, but if something that does come up, I will let you know.
Okay.
Thank you. And then we'll go with Nomsa. Hi, Nomsa.
Hi, Nomsa.
Yeah, devotees. Yeah, Hare Krishna, Mother Aloka.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for such a beautiful class. It's been so lovely to hear your reflections and your sharing. My question, I think, was partially answered by the question that you just answered a moment ago, but I wanted to ask off of the back of what Spongila asked when she was speaking about some of the things that she was experiencing, and you sort of alluded to the fact that it could be a conditioning, not necessarily who she really is. So who are we? How do you find out who you are if so much of what we identify as ourselves is a covering or a conditioning or something that we've built up to protect ourselves or defend ourselves or just to exist and to be within the world? Because you also spoke about being and to be comfortable with being ourselves. And when you answered Pavita, you said, are you confident in who you are? Are you comfortable? Are you allowing yourself to be yourself? How do we get there? Who are we? And how do we find that out?
Oh my goodness. Well, you know, where I'd start is to say, who are we really? You know, our scriptures address that. I mean, the whole point of the spiritual path for us is to get to a point where we begin to understand we aren't our bodies. We aren't the face that we look at in the mirror. We're not the age that we have, that we think we are. We aren't the gender that we think we are. We're none of those actual things. We're really a form of, we're spirit soul. And that spirit soul is in relationship to God. And that's what we want to get at. We want to get at that. All of these other pieces are coverings, and they relate to, they can come from our karma. They come from the way that we were brought up, the things that we were conditioned to do, the responses we were conditioned to have. But essentially, we're all loving, accepting servants of the Lord and of each other. We talk so much about the connection with Krishna or with God, and that's appropriate, but we also have connections with each other, the horizontal connections with each other. We are a community together. And the conditioning is all of this stuff that keeps us from accepting that and recognizing that might have us say, oh, well, you know, she's sitting over there in South Africa, I don't care, or, you know, what her problems are, or he's somebody that's got these issues, you know, I don't like the way he shows up for Mangal or tea every morning, so I'm just not going to deal with him. You know, it's those artificial distinctions that we make that keep us separated and keep us finding fault. So how we get past that, again, it's that there's a sense of real honesty and focus with ourselves. Who do I want to be? Who do I want to show up as? You know, and for those who say, well, I want to show up as the most powerful person on the planet, and I want to have all this stuff, well, then God bless you. That's the direction you're going, and you're going to make choices that feed that. But if we really appreciate that we're something beyond that, and we want to start digging more deeply and letting go of those anarthas, then there are hopefully some of the resources that we'll be able to post on ISKCON Hearts will help with that. There are exercises, there are books, there are things to focus on. And I always say, just begin with that sense of prayer. And I can remember when I first, I had a way of doing things, and you know, sometimes I'd get criticized, well, you're doing it this way, and I say, yeah, but that's who I am. You know, that's who I am. That's kind of how I roll, right? And one day I got very sort of full of myself, because somebody that was in an authority position, but that I thought was just really kind of carrying it a little bit too far, because she was also a friend, sort of said something to me, and I kind of got into my high horse and like, okay, you know, so just, and next thing I knew, I was getting called on the carpet by the big boss. And she was too, but you know, the point is, I got called on, and the little voice in my head said, hey, this is the way I roll. Who the hell are you talking to me like that? And then I had another voice that said, wait a minute. It's not like this is the first time you've heard that. There's something here. And I've been doing some reading off and on, but there was this, and it was that there's something here to learn that stopped me cold. So I just shut up. I listened to what was coming at me, walked out. It was a Friday afternoon. I was able to go home, and I prayed. I prayed hard. You know, there's a shift that wants to take place here. Tell me what I need to do. And the minute I sincerely offered that prayer and felt that energy, stuff started showing up. I mean, literally stuff started showing up from day to day, from week to week. And so in the desire to really say, how do I get there? How do I truly ground myself and believe in myself at the same time that I recognize there are things I'm going to let go of, and I'm not going to own this covering as the real me? How do I get beyond that? When you ask like that, in that mood of sincerity, I promise you that things move and stuff will happen, and you will find a path forward. You will find people to help you. You will find things that you need to do. Just ignore the dinging there. I don't know. I'm not good enough to know how to shut it off. So I hope that answers your question.
So we want to thank NOMSA. Leela, is there anybody else that we just need to quickly, and otherwise we need to close the session. We're 20 minutes over at this point. And it is late.
We're good. We're good.
We're good? Okay. Because it's late.
Thank you for putting up with me, everybody. Thank you so much.
No, it's late in South Africa right now. And Loka, we just want to really express our deepest gratitude for you taking the time. I know that this is a stretch and I know what it means. You know, there's so many things you put on hold to be with us. We sincerely, all of us, really, really appreciate the time that you spend with us. And I'm guessing all of us, not that I'm guessing, I know all of us are going to take away so much from what you shared with us today. We really appreciate it so much.
It's such a sweet group. It's such a sweet group. I really appreciate your inviting me and allowing me to attempt to tackle this topic of belonging. So thank you.